The woman sits in her English countryside home, 66 years old now, her once iconic auburn hair silvered by time and solitude. Outside, the Cotswolds stretch endlessly green, beautiful, and empty. Inside, the silence is profound. No recording equipment, no tour buses idling in the driveway, no paparazzi telephoto lenses trained on her windows. This is Sade Adu in 2025. The voice that once moved millions to tears with Smooth Operator and No Ordinary Love now speaks mainly to her horses, her dogs, her small circle of family. The woman who defined sophisticated soul music for a generation has become something rarer still. A legend who chose invisibility over immortality. She could fill stadiums tomorrow. The world would weep to hear that voice again, that perfect marriage of pain and silk that made her the best-selling British female artist of all time. Instead, she tends her garden. She watches the seasons change. She protects what little remains untouched by the machine that once consumed her. At 66, Sade Adu embodies perhaps the most heartbreaking paradox in modern music. The artist so wounded by fame that silence became her sanctuary, isolation her only peace. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to a little girl caught between two worlds, learning that love always comes with a price. This is the story of how the music industry's most enigmatic star became its greatest disappearing act, how a mixed-race girl from Nigeria and England transformed personal pain into perfect art, then watched that very perfection become a prison. How success, for some souls, isn't liberation. It's a beautiful trap. If this story moves you, tap like so others can find it. Because Sade's journey reminds us that even our most untouchable icons are, in the end, searchers just like us, looking for home, for peace, for the right to exist on their own terms. She was born Helen Folasade Adu on January 16, 1959, in Ibadan, Nigeria, to a Nigerian economics professor father and an English district nurse mother. Even her name carried the weight of two worlds, Helen for her mother's England, Folasade, meaning honor confers a crown, for her father's Nigeria. The crown would come, but not without cost. When she was 4, her world fractured. Her parents' marriage collapsed under the pressure of cultural divides and personal incompatibilities. Her mother, Anne Hayes, made the brutal choice that would define her daughter's entire emotional landscape. She took Sade and her younger brother back to England, leaving their father behind in Nigeria. Picture a little girl on an airplane, flying away from the only home she'd known, from the language that felt natural in her mouth, from a father who would become increasingly distant with every passing year. The first great abandonment. The first lesson that love ends, that people leave. They settled in Clacton-on-Sea, a working-class English seaside town where a mixed-race girl from Nigeria stood out, like an exotic bird in a flock of sparrows. The late 1960s weren't kind to children who looked different. Sade learned to navigate playground cruelties with the same stoic grace that would later make her famous. Chin up, armor on, feelings buried deep. Picture the young girl walking to school each morning, past the gray council flats and the windswept promenade, carrying the weight of not quite belonging anywhere, the other children's stares, the whispered questions about where she was really from, the teachers who meant well but couldn't hide their surprise when this quiet, beautiful child spoke with a perfect English accent. Her mother, Anne, worked as a nurse during the day and took cleaning jobs at night. The sound of her mother's keys in the door at midnight became the lullaby of Sade's childhood. Anne Hayes was a woman of incredible strength, but the burden of single motherhood in 1960s England, especially as a white woman raising mixed-race children, was enormous. There were nights when dinner was beans on toast again, mornings when the electricity meter ran out and they dressed by candlelight, the shame of free school meals, of clothes that didn't quite fit, of birthday parties not attended because gifts couldn't be afforded. But there was also fierce love in that small house by the sea, and a determination that these children would rise above their circumstances. Sade learned independence early, self-reliance as survival skill. She also learned that emotional needs came secondary to practical ones. Food, shelter, safety first. Dreams and feelings were luxuries they couldn't afford. But she also absorbed her mother's work ethic, her refusal to be pitied, her quiet dignity in the face of hardship. The relationship with her father became increasingly distant. Letters from Nigeria arrived sporadically, then stopped altogether. The man who had given her half her heritage, half her striking features, half her name, became a ghost. This abandonment, slow, quiet, but complete, carved something hollow inside her that would echo through every relationship that followed. But music was different. Music was free. She discovered her voice in the bathtub, singing along to Marvin Gaye and Nina Simone records her mother played on their small stereo. That voice, even then, at 10, 11, 12, carried something ancient and wounded, something that seemed to understand loss before most people learned what loss was. The bathroom acoustics made her sound like she was singing from inside a cathedral, every note reverberating back to her, confirming that yes, this was where she belonged. Nina Simone became her first teacher, though they would never meet. The way Simone could take a standard love song and make it sound like a funeral dirge, or transform a protest anthem into an intimate confession, this was the alchemy Sade began practicing in secret. She learned that pain, properly channeled, could become beautiful. That loneliness, sung correctly, could connect you to everyone who had ever felt alone. The microphone in the bathroom became her first audience. The acoustics perfect, the privacy absolute. No one could judge her there. No one could leave her there. In that small tiled sanctuary, Helen Sade Adu began her transformation into Sade. By 15, she was stunning. Tall, angular, with cheekbones that suggested royalty and eyes that held secrets. But beauty, for a mixed-race teenager in 1970s England, was complicated. Too exotic for some, not exotic enough for others. Another form of homelessness, another way of not quite fitting anywhere. She studied fashion at St. Martin's School of Art in London, learning to construct armor out of fabric and style. The sleek aesthetic that would later define her image began there. Minimalist, elegant, untouchable. But fashion was a mask, not a calling. When she joined the band Pride in 1982 as a backup singer, something clicked. Not the spotlight, she was still backing other voices then. Not the crowd's attention, she was still part of someone else's vision. But the moment when her voice rose above the instruments, when it caught something in the air and held it, transformed it, made it beautiful and aching and real. That was when Helen began to die, and Sade was born. The transformation from backing singer to band leader happened with unusual swiftness, as if the universe had been waiting for her to step forward. In 1983, she convinced 3 members of Pride to leave with her and form a new group. They would call themselves Sade, though the band was always more than her name alone. Stuart Matthewman on guitar, Andrew Hale on keyboards, and Paul Anthony Cook on drums became her musical family, the consistent foundation that allowed her to explore the more vulnerable territories of her voice. But make no mistake, when record executives heard their demos, they heard her, that voice, that presence, that indefinable quality that made the air in a room change when she began to sing. Epic Records signed them in 1983, and their debut album, Diamond Life, arrived in July 1984 like a love letter, written in a language no one knew they'd been waiting to hear. The recording process had been unlike anything the industry was used to. Sade insisted on creative control that most new artists could never demand. She co-wrote every song, had final approval on arrangements, and refused to compromise her vision for commercial appeal. The studio sessions revealed her perfectionism early, take after take, searching for the exact emotional temperature each song required. She wasn't just singing words, she was excavating feelings, mining her own experiences for the raw material that would become timeless music. The vulnerability required was enormous, and yet she seemed to approach it with the discipline of a surgeon. The singles told the story of who she was becoming. Your Love is King reached number 6 on the UK charts, but more importantly, it announced the arrival of a completely new kind of soul music. Sophisticated, international, crafted with the precision of a Swiss watch and the emotional resonance of late-night confessions. The song was about romantic devotion, but listen closely and you hear something else. A woman who had learned too young that love meant loss, that kings eventually abandoned their kingdoms. Then came Smooth Operator, the song that would define her, trap her, and ultimately exhaust her with its perfection. The track emerged from a songwriting session that felt more like therapy than commerce. Stuart Matthewman had this guitar riff that sounded like seduction and danger wrapped together. Sade heard it and immediately understood what it was about, not just a smooth-talking man, but the whole apparatus of charm that people use to protect themselves from real intimacy. Was she singing about a lover, or was she predicting her own relationship with fame? The music video, shot in black and white with noir lighting, created an aesthetic that would become her signature: elegant, mysterious, untouchable. She appeared in a tuxedo jacket, androgynous and commanding, smoking a cigarette like she was born to it. The image was powerful, but it was also a costume. The real Sade was far more fragile than this sleek persona suggested. Smooth Operator hit number 5 in the UK, number 5 in the US, and seemed to lodge itself permanently in the collective unconscious. But success at this level comes with expectations that no human being can sustain. Radio programmers wanted more songs exactly like it. Record executives wanted her to become the smooth operator, to embody the mystery and sexuality of the song in every public appearance. Diamond Life sold over 6 million copies worldwide, making Sade the best-selling debut by a British female artist. At 25, she had achieved something most musicians dream of their entire careers. She had also begun a pattern that would define the rest of her life. Periods of intense creative output followed by complete withdrawal. But success came with immediate complications that no one had prepared her for. The music press couldn't figure out how to categorize her. Was she jazz? Soul? Pop? Her mixed heritage confused them further. Was she African? British? The need to label, to categorize, to own her image began immediately and would never stop. Interviews became ordeals. She sat stiffly in chairs across from journalists who asked intrusive questions about her background, her love life, her exotic looks. She learned to give answers that revealed nothing while seeming to be forthcoming. The mask was forming, the armor that would protect her but also isolate her from genuine human connection. She gave interviews reluctantly, performed with visible discomfort in the spotlight, and retreated between promotional cycles like a wounded animal seeking shelter. The woman who could command any room with her voice seemed to shrink when asked direct questions about herself. Photographers loved her bone structure, her androgynous beauty, but she hated being photographed, hated the way cameras seemed to steal something from her with every click. The touring began almost immediately, and it revealed another layer of contradiction. On stage, she was magnificent. That voice could transform any venue into an intimate space, could make thousands of people feel like they were receiving personal confessions. But backstage, she was learning that fame meant the end of privacy, the end of normalcy, the end of being able to exist without performance. The second album, Promise, arrived in 1985 and proved that Diamond Life wasn't a fluke. The Sweetest Taboo became another global hit, reaching the top 10 in multiple countries. But the title track, Is It a Crime?, revealed something darker, a song about guilt, about loving someone despite the cost, about emotional patterns that feel inescapable. Was she singing about romantic relationships, or about her increasingly complicated relationship with fame itself? The tours were magnificent and torturous. Her voice live was even more powerful than on record, her stage presence magnetic yet distant. She would emerge in her trademark elegant simplicity, often just a black dress, minimal makeup, perfect posture, and transform concert halls into intimate spaces where thousands of people felt like they were receiving personal confessions. But backstage, the cost was accumulating. The constant travel, the interviews asking the same questions, the photographers wanting the same angles, the sense that her privacy was being systematically stripped away, layer by layer, until she might disappear entirely. Her third album, Stronger Than Pride, released in 1988, pushed her sound into more experimental territories while the title seemed to dare the world to test her resolve. The album went platinum, spawning hits like Paradise and Nothing Can Come Between Us, but by then the contradictions were becoming impossible to ignore. She was stronger than Pride, according to the album title, but was she stronger than the machine that was reshaping her life without her consent? Then came the first long silence. After the Stronger Than Pride tour ended in 1989, Sade essentially vanished. No new album, no tours, no interviews. The music industry waited. Her fans waited. The world waited. She had disappeared to Madrid, reports suggested, to study art and live a normal life. Others claimed she was in the Caribbean or back in Nigeria, reconnecting with her roots. The truth was simpler and more complicated. She was learning that fame, for some people, isn't a gift. It's a burden that threatens to consume everything authentic about who they are. The phone call came in 1992, 3 years into her self-imposed exile. Epic Records wanted to know, Would there be another album? The music industry doesn't wait well. 3 years without new product from a major artist is an eternity in record company time. Pressure mounted. Contract obligations loomed. The machine that had lifted her to international stardom now threatened to drag her back whether she was ready or not. But something had changed during those quiet years in Madrid. She had become a mother. Her daughter, Ila, was born in 1996, and suddenly the abstract concept of legacy became immediate and personal. What kind of world was she creating for this child? What kind of example was she setting about how to navigate success and authenticity? The fourth album, Love Deluxe, emerged in 1992 like a phoenix from the ashes of her retreat. It was her most complex work yet, featuring the heart-stopping No Ordinary Love, a song so emotionally raw it seemed to bleed through the speakers. The single reached number 4 in the US and became her biggest hit in years. But listen to the lyrics. I gave you all the love I got. I gave you more than I could give. Was she singing about romantic love, or about her relationship with her audience, her career, the machine that demanded everything and offered isolation in return? Love Deluxe went multi-platinum, proving she could disappear for years and return stronger than ever. But it also established a dangerous precedent, that her absences made her presence more precious, her silence more valuable than most artists' continuous output. The tour that followed was her largest yet, playing to sold-out arenas across the world. But something fundamental had shifted. She no longer seemed to be performing for the audience's pleasure. She seemed to be performing despite it, as if each show was a necessary ritual she had to complete before returning to the safety of privacy. After the final show of the Love Deluxe tour, she looked out at the crowd, smiled that enigmatic smile, and once again disappeared. This time, the silence would last 8 years. 8 years. In music industry terms, it's career suicide. Artists who disappear for 8 years are forgotten, replaced, relegated to whatever happened to lists. But Sade wasn't most artists, and her absence became its own kind of presence, a mystery that grew more intriguing with each passing year. The decision to disappear wasn't impulsive, it was calculated, necessary, and probably saved her life. The machine of fame had been consuming her piece by piece, her privacy, her authenticity, her ability to exist without performing. She had reached a breaking point that many artists face but few have the courage to address. Continue and lose yourself completely, or stop and try to remember who you were before the world decided who you should be. She moved to Jamaica first, drawn by the rhythms that had always felt like home even when home was uncertain. The island offered something impossible in London or New York: anonymity. She could walk down streets without being recognized, could sit in cafes without photographers materializing, could simply exist without the constant awareness of being watched, judged, commodified. But disappearing isn't the same as healing. The wounds that fame had torn open, the childhood abandonment, the racial displacement, the impossibility of trusting new relationships when your face is on magazine covers, these required more than geographical distance to address. In Jamaica, she rented a simple house near the water and began the slow process of remembering who Sade Adu had been before Sade became a global phenomenon. She painted, something she hadn't done since art school. She gardened. She learned to cook traditional Jamaican dishes, finding peace in the meditative repetition of chopping vegetables, the alchemy of transforming simple ingredients into nourishment. But the isolation that had once felt protective began to feel like exile. Days would pass without meaningful human interaction. The phone would ring, her mother, her brother, record executives checking in, but these calls felt like interruptions of a life she was still trying to construct. She was wealthy enough to live comfortably without working, but comfort isn't the same as purpose. Reports from this period are scarce and often contradictory, but those close to her described a woman wrestling with demons that success couldn't touch. The same perfectionism that made her music flawless made her personal life unbearable. Nothing was ever good enough. No relationship was ever safe enough. No amount of privacy was ever private enough. She tried therapy, tried meditation, tried various forms of spiritual practice. Some helped temporarily, but the fundamental problem remained. She was a public person who needed privacy like other people needed air, and fame had made privacy nearly impossible to maintain. Then came motherhood, and everything changed again. When her daughter, Ila, was born in 1996, suddenly the abstract concept of legacy became immediate and personal. What kind of world was she creating for this child? What kind of example was she setting about how to navigate success and authenticity? How do you protect someone you love from the very machinery that made your love possible to sustain financially? Single motherhood added another layer of complexity. The father, Carlos Scola, was a Spanish model she had met during her hiatus, but their relationship couldn't survive the pressures of her fame and her need for privacy. Co-parenting across continents while maintaining invisibility became an almost impossible balancing act. The music industry moved on without her, which was both liberating and terrifying. New female artists emerged: Lauryn Hill, Erykah Badu, D'Angelo, carrying forward the neo-soul movement she had helped pioneer. Awards shows stopped mentioning her name. Radio stations played her hits as throwback tracks. She was becoming a memory of herself, which was exactly what she had wanted and exactly what she feared. But in Jamaica, in England, in whatever sanctuary she had constructed, she was still writing, still singing, if only for herself. The voice that millions loved was still there, in private moments, in unrecorded songs, in melodies hummed while walking alone on beaches or through countryside paths. The creative impulse hadn't died. It had just gone underground, like a river that disappears from view but continues flowing beneath the surface. Those who caught glimpses of her during this period described someone almost ghostly, still beautiful, still magnetic, but carrying a sadness that seemed too large for one person to bear. The girl who had learned to navigate abandonment and displacement had become a woman who had perfected the art of abandoning herself, over and over, whenever the world got too close. The irony was devastating. She had achieved everything she had ever dreamed of as a young artist, and it had made happiness impossible. Success had become indistinguishable from suffering. Love from fans felt like invasion. Admiration felt like theft. The very thing that was supposed to give her life meaning had stolen meaning from her life. By the late 1990s, whispers began that she might never record again. That the voice that had defined sophisticated soul music for a generation had chosen eternal silence over continued exposure. Record executives made pilgrimages to her various hideouts, offering enormous sums for just one album, just one tour, just one return to the world that missed her. Those whispers weren't entirely wrong. The woman who returned with Lovers Rock in 2000 was fundamentally different from the one who had disappeared in 1992. When Lovers Rock appeared in 2000, it arrived like a message from a distant planet, familiar yet transformed, intimate yet unreachable. 8 years of silence had distilled her artistry to its essence. Gone were the jazz flourishes and production complexities that had occasionally cluttered her earlier work. What remained was purer, sadder, more human than anything she had ever recorded. The album was born from necessity rather than ambition. Not financial necessity, her previous albums continued generating substantial royalties, but spiritual necessity. She needed to prove to herself that she could still create, that the years of silence hadn't killed the essential thing that made her who she was. The recording process was different this time. No more record company pressure about singles and radio play. No more meetings about marketing strategies and target demographics. She had earned the right to make music entirely on her own terms, and the freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. The album's title track was a love letter to reggae, to Jamaica, to the rhythms that had sustained her through the dark years. But it was also a love letter to the possibility of love itself, sung by someone who had almost given up believing in it. The song captured something essential about her experience in Jamaica, not the tourist paradise version, but the real island, with its complex history of survival and resistance and joy carved out of struggle. By Your Side, perhaps the most beautiful song she ever recorded, was written for her daughter, but resonated with anyone who had ever felt abandoned. The lyrics were simple, almost childlike, but the emotion was oceanic. Here was a woman who had been left by her father, who had been consumed by fame, who had retreated from the world, promising someone else that she would never leave. The vulnerability required to sing those words was staggering. At 41, she sounded both ancient and newborn, weathered by experience but still hoping for connection. Her voice had changed during the years away, deeper, more textured, carrying the weight of everything she had survived. The smooth perfection of her youth had been replaced by something more interesting, wisdom, hard-earned and impossible to fake. Lovers Rock debuted at number 3 in the US and topped charts worldwide, proving that audiences would wait decades for her voice if necessary. But the success felt different now, less like victory, more like obligation. The machine wanted more. It always wanted more. Record executives who had written her off as a has-been suddenly appeared with contracts and tour proposals and marketing plans. The promotional cycle was minimal by modern standards, but still felt like too much for someone who had grown accustomed to complete privacy. She gave interviews reluctantly, revealing glimpses of the person behind the mystique. She spoke about motherhood, about the challenge of raising a child while maintaining the boundaries necessary for her survival. She hinted at personal struggles without naming them, maintained mystery while suggesting depth. But the most revealing moment came when an interviewer asked about her long absences. Her response was telling, "I never left. I was always here. I just wasn't performing for you." The distinction was crucial. Sade the woman had never disappeared. She had simply refused to perform Sade the icon. She had chosen authenticity over availability, personal peace over public consumption. In an industry that demanded constant visibility, she had pioneered a different model: presence through absence, power through withdrawal. The tour that followed Lovers Rock was smaller, more intimate, but no less powerful. She seemed more comfortable on stage now, less like someone fulfilling an obligation and more like someone sharing something precious. The staging was simple. Just her band, and lighting that created intimate spaces within vast arenas. But it was clear this would not become a regular pattern. She was not returning to the traditional cycle of album-tour-album that defines most musical careers. This was a gift, not a promise of regular gifts to come. Another silence followed, this one lasting 10 years. But by now, fans had learned to wait. Sade's absences had become a part of her artistry, periods of germination before the next. Flowering. The music industry had changed dramatically during her absence. The internet had transformed how music was consumed and promoted, but her approach remained constant: create when inspired, share when ready, disappear when necessary. Soldier of Love arrived in 2010, her first album in a decade, and it topped charts worldwide despite zero promotion, no interviews, no traditional marketing campaign. The title track was her first #1 single in 25 years, proving that authenticity, when rare enough, becomes its own currency. But the lyrics of Soldier of Love told a different story than Celebration. She was tired. The soldier had fought too many battles, survived too many wars. She was still standing, still creating, but the cost was visible now in ways it hadn't been in her youth. The song was simultaneously defiant and defeated, a warrior's anthem sung by someone who had grown weary of war. The album explored themes of endurance, survival, the price of longevity in a world that discards artists as quickly as it creates them. Baby Father, a collaboration with her son Isaac, introduced new musical elements while maintaining her essential sound. At 51, she was still evolving, still finding new ways to transform pain into beauty. The tour was her biggest yet, playing to millions worldwide, but it was also positioned as possibly her final tour. She was 51, had nothing left to prove, and had achieved something almost unprecedented. She had dictated the terms of her own fame and largely won. The performances during this period were something to behold. A woman at the peak of her powers, singing songs that spanned decades of experience for audiences that had waited years to hear them. But there was something elegiac about the whole enterprise, a sense of closure, of a story reaching its natural conclusion. Since then, the silence has been nearly complete. Occasional photographs surface, her at her son's wedding, walking her dogs in the English countryside, tending to her horses. She looks peaceful, content, genuinely private in a way that seems almost supernatural in the social media age. At 66, she has outlasted most of her contemporaries not through constant reinvention, but through strategic disappearance. She proved that in an industry obsessed with more albums, more tours, more exposure, more access, sometimes less becomes more powerful than anyone imagined possible. She stands in her garden now, the same woman who once filled stadiums with her voice, who once made the world stop and listen to stories of love and loss sung with perfect precision. The horses graze nearby. She has 3 of them, rescued animals that she tends with the same care she once gave to crafting the perfect vocal take. The countryside stretches endless and green beyond her property lines. The silence is profound and, finally, chosen. The Cotswolds home she calls sanctuary sits on several acres, far enough from Maine, roads that photographers with telephoto lenses can't capture candid moments, private enough that she can exist without performance. The house itself is modest by celebrity standards, comfortable but not ostentatious, filled with art she's collected over the years, books she actually reads, furniture chosen for comfort rather than style. This is where she has chosen to age, to live out whatever chapters remain of her story. At 66, the face that once graced magazine covers worldwide has softened with time, but the bone structure remains aristocratic. The eyes still hold mysteries that interviewers spent decades trying to unlock. Her hair, once that signature auburn cascade, is now silver-streaked and often pulled back simply. She dresses for comfort now. Jeans, sweaters, boots suitable for muddy fields. The transformation from global icon to country recluse wasn't sudden. It was gradual, intentional, a decades-long process of choosing authenticity over accessibility. Each album cycle, each tour, each promotional campaign became a negotiation between the public's hunger for her and her own need for preservation. Over time, preservation won. But this isn't a story of defeat. This is a story of perhaps the most radical act in modern entertainment: the right to exist without performing, to be beloved without being available, to achieve immortality through the very act of disappearing. Consider what she accomplished. 6 studio albums spanning nearly 3 decades. Over 50 million records sold worldwide. A catalog of songs that defined sophisticated soul music for multiple generations. Grammy Awards, platinum certifications, critical acclaim that never wavered. She influenced everyone from Alicia Keys to FKA Twigs, from Norah Jones to Solange Knowles. Her aesthetic, that minimalist elegance that studied cool, became the template for how intelligent pop music could look and sound. But more importantly, she proved something that the entertainment industry didn't want to believe: that an artist could succeed entirely on their own terms. She never compromised her vision for commercial appeal, never took roles in movies to expand her brand, never dated publicly for tabloid coverage, never engaged in social media to maintain relevance, never collaborated with trending artists to stay current. Instead, she created a different model of celebrity, one based on scarcity rather than saturation, quality rather than quantity, mystery rather than transparency. She made absence feel like presence, made waiting feel like privilege, made silence feel like the most profound statement of all. Her story reminds us that some forms of success are indistinguishable from tragedy, that getting everything you thought you wanted can sometimes cost you everything you actually needed. The music industry promises artists the world, but rarely mentions that accepting the world means giving up your private universe, your right to exist without commentary, your ability to change without everyone noticing. She chose authenticity over fame, privacy over presence, peace over profit. In an age of constant exposure, she maintained mystery. In an industry demanding more, she insisted on less. In a culture that confuses visibility with value, she proved that some of the most powerful forces operate from the shadows. The horses know nothing of her Grammy Awards, her platinum albums, her influence on generations of musicians. To them, she's simply the woman who brings them carrots, who speaks to them in soft tones, who ensures they're safe and fed and loved. In a way, this is the truest measure of who she has become. Not the icon the world worships from a distance, but the person her animals trust completely. If this story moved you, hit like and share so others can discover it. Subscribe for more stories about the hidden costs of fame and the courage it takes to choose your own path. Because in a world that measures success by visibility, by noise, by constant output, Sade's story is a reminder that sometimes the most profound victory is the right to disappear. But here's my question for you. Which part of Sade's journey resonates most deeply? Her meteoric rise that came at the cost of her privacy, her strategic disappearances that preserved her sanity, or her ultimate choice to prioritize peace over performance? And what does her story teach us about the real price of getting everything we think we want? Think about it. In our social media age, when everyone performs their lives for audiences of strangers, when privacy feels extinct and authenticity feels impossible, what would it mean to choose silence? What would it cost to choose invisibility? What would it take to choose yourself over what the world wants you to be? Her voice, when we hear it again, if we hear it again, will carry the weight of all these years, all these choices, all this beautifully sustained silence. And perhaps that's the most perfect art of all, knowing when to speak and when to let the mystery of absence say everything that needs to be said. In the end, Sade Adu's greatest creation wasn't any single album or song. It was the life she built in the spaces between public moments, the peace she cultivated in the silence between performances, the person she remained when the spotlights went dark and the audiences went home. That person, Helen Sade Adu, tending her horses in the English countryside, might just be her masterpiece.